Hey everyone, welcome in. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the world of podcasts. More specifically, is being a guest on a podcast the best way to reach new listeners? We've got some articles here with some pretty wild stats, so get ready.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, so everyone knows the podcasting scene is huge right now. There are millions and millions of podcasts, but one of these articles said that something like 75% of podcasts don't even make it past episode 1. Which is, it's kind of rough, right?
Yeah, it's a tough world out there.
Yeah.
These days it feels like anyone can just hit record, but building a loyal audience, that's not easy. You've got to think about people listening to podcasts they already like, and algorithms and marketing. It's a lot.
Yeah, one of these articles said that podcasters spend an average of 10 hours every week just on production and marketing. 10 hours. I know, right? That's a lot. So I get why people are like, okay, what else can we do?
Right, and that's where this whole guesting thing comes in. Instead of starting from nothing, why not go on a show that already has tons of listeners? You're tapping into a community that's already there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you can spend less time building an audience and more time talking about the stuff you know. But what about making your own podcast? Isn't there something to that, like building your own brand?
Oh, for sure. When you have your own podcast, you can really find your own voice and build a community and decide when you want to release episodes and stuff. But you're right, it takes a lot of work and time and money to make that happen.
So it's do you spend a ton of time and energy trying to make your own podcast, or do you try to get on a show that's already popular?
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to think about what you're trying to do right. What are your goals? Are you trying to reach as many people as possible right now, or are you okay with something that might take a lot longer?
Okay, so let's say I'm trying to get new listeners as fast as possible. Are there stats that show that guesting actually works?
Oh yeah, for sure. One study said that podcast listeners were almost 60% more likely to do something after they heard someone on a podcast compared to listening to a regular ad.
60%. What do you mean by do something?
Visit a website or buy a product or whatever the guest was talking about.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess it's different when you feel like you're hearing from a real person rather than just an ad. You have to trust the host to bring someone interesting onto their show, right?
Right. It has to be authentic. And it gets even better. One study said that 90% of podcast listeners remembered ads they heard on podcasts.
90%? Are you
Right.
serious?
Yeah, that never happens with commercials or anything.
That's crazy. Okay, so podcasts are definitely the place to be if you want people to actually listen, and guesting seems like a good way to do that. But you mentioned building authority earlier. How does that work if you're a guest?
Well, think about it this way. If you're a guest on a show with a really good reputation, a show your ideal listener already likes, you seem more credible too.
Oh, so it's kind of like getting endorsed, but in a way that's actually believable.
Exactly. And you're providing something valuable to the listener, which makes you seem like an expert. Plus, you're on a show that's about something you care about, so you know the listeners are already interested in what you have to say.
So it's instead of just hoping someone finds your podcast, you can put yourself right in front of people who want to hear what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And the cool thing about guesting is you can always start by guesting, and then maybe later you start your own podcast or do both at the same time.
Right. It's like testing it out before you go all in. So for someone listening who's okay, podcasting sounds kind of cool, but that 75% failure rate is scary, what should they do?
Honestly, those stats shouldn't scare you off. The important thing is to be smart about it. What are you trying to accomplish? Do you want to grow your business or share your knowledge with people or build a community? Once you know what you want, you can figure out the best way to do it. And like we were saying, sometimes the best way isn't the most obvious way.
It's all about working smarter, not harder, right?
Exactly. Sometimes the smartest thing you could do is work with other people and learn from them. Podcasting is a community, and if you're a guest on someone's show, you're part of that.
All right, so now for the final thought I always like to leave our listeners with. If you could be a guest on any podcast in the world, which one would it be, and what's the one thing you would want to tell those listeners?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's hard to pick just one, but it would definitely have to be a show with an audience that's really curious and loves learning new things. And as for what I would say, maybe just a reminder that it's so important to ask questions. When you're curious about the world, you can learn so much.
Very well said. And there you have it, folks. Your deep dive into podcast guesting. Now go forth and make some podcast magic. Or, just send an email to your favorite show. You never know what might happen.